आप सब्सक्राइब करें, बाद में नोटिफिकेशन को नन पर रखें और सब्सक्राइब पूरा करने में सहायता करें।
Okay, everyone. So as you can see, I'm just gonna use the same code that we've been using in the previous 2 episodes, where we just have this like simple web page with 3 different routes, and each of them is represented by a component, right? And what we're gonna be doing is we're gonna be using a React query to fetch data from the same API we worked with in the, I think it was on the first fetching video, which is the one that just gives us back a fact about a cat, right? It's just a public API that requires no keys, no signups, anything. You just go to this URL, and every time you make a request to this URL, which can be done by either fetching data with your code or by just refreshing the page, you get a JSON with a random cat fact, as you can see over here, right? This is just for simplicity reasons, a very simple API. There's only one thing that it returns, so that's what we're going to be using right now. And I'm going to explain to you guys why would we use React Query at all, right? Because I've shown to you guys that whenever I want to fetch data, I would just use a use effect and then use either Axios or the fetch API to just request the data and then set that data to a state, right? If you don't know what I'm talking about, I would recommend watching my fetching data video. It's episode 7. But that's what we've learned so far, and that's totally fine, right? But if you recall, to fetch data with the use effect, you actually have to do something that is not recommended. You have to come to your index.js over here and remove the component that is surrounding the app component called strict mode. And strict mode already comes with the Create React app. If you recall all the setup before episode 7, we had this function in the index.js just like this. Strict mode is something provided by React, and it will enforce best practices when you're coding your React application. So removing it is kind of bad because we're kind of saying it feels like cheating, right? And the whole purpose of us removing it was because previously, if you see any tutorial before, I would say like March 2022, you would see people using the use effect to fetch data. But that's actually never recommended, and people would just do that, including me, because it was an easy way to explain to beginners. But what the React team did, and you can ask my opinion on that, I don't think that was the right decision. They basically created on the new version of React a use effect that it's called twice because it tests to see if you are actually following its best practices, and that would make requesting the data bad because you would be fetching data twice, and that's why we removed the strict mode. But they did this because they wanted to tell every developer that you should be using a fetching solution such as a React Query. So that's the preface to why we want to use React Query. Not only that, but React Query will facilitate fetching data and just mutating data, everything related to requesting and sending data to an API by a lot. Like it's uncanny how much it facilitates your life, and we'll see all of this as we go. But for now, all we have to do is start installing the React Query library. So in order to install it, we have to come over here and open a new terminal, different from the one we are running npm start. And over here, we just want to say npm install, and then we're going to put this over here, add 10stack/React Query. Now, they changed this. Before it was just React Query. So if you try following your old tutorials, maybe you'll get everything wrong. But now you have to put add 10stack/React Query for it to work. Now that we have installed it, I want to go to our app component because it has all of the components inside of it, right? What you want to do is you want to go to the component that is the highest level of where you want to fetch data. Remember of what I taught in the previous episode where I taught about the context API. The highest level component is basically the component that is above all of the other components, right? So in here, the app component contains all of the other components in our app. So that this would be the highest level component. And you want to set up your React Query application at the highest level in which you want to make a request. What that means is you can actually put parts of your application using React Query and parts of your application you're not using React Query. So you got to specify which components you want to have access to React Query functionality. In our case, we're just going to put it on the app one because it is the highest level and we want to have access to React Query everywhere in our app, right? So inside of here, I want to import from the add 10stack React Query, and I want to import what is known as the query client, just like this, and also what is known as the query client provider. Now you see the word provider, and you might immediately remember what we learned previously about the context provider when you're using the context API, and it has a similar idea to that. So I'm gonna explain to you guys in a second. In the component that you want to create your React query application, you have to create a variable called client, and you say const client equals to new query client, and this, not query, just query client. And this query client over here, it actually allows you to pass on a config object that we're not gonna configure right now or even in this video, because it's more for a little more advanced stuff. But this over here can allow you to do a lot of stuff, and this is where you would put that kind of information. But the important thing over here is having the client with us, because now we can use the query client provider around the whole app like this, and this allows us to specify which components will have access to React Query. So every component inside of this will have access to React Query. In our case, every component is inside of it because we put all of them in routes, except the navbar, which is also inside of the query client provider, as you can see. And we have to specify that the client for this provider is the one that we created, just like this. So now that we've done this, we have access to React Query in any of these components. So let's just go to one of them and test it out. I'm gonna go to the home component just because it is the home component, and we can just fetch the data over here. Like I said before, if we wanted to fetch data before, we would have to use a use effect and then maybe use Axios or something like that, but we don't want to do that anymore. Now we have access to React Query, which is amazing, right? So what I want to do is I want to come over here at the top, and I want to import from @10stack React Query, and we want to import a hook called the use query hook. Now this hook will be used to make requests that you get data from an API. There's another one that is used to mutate data, to change data, but we're not going to use that in this video. We're just going to get data. So the use query is very simple. You just come over here and you say const, then you put curly braces over here. You set this equal to the use query hook, and the use query hook takes in two different pieces of information, two arguments to it. First of all, it takes in an array. And this array includes a unique key that this query represents. So why do we need something like that? Well, React Query allows us to give a unique ID for each query we make for purposes of later, for example, caching the data or refetching the data. It's just a way to identify all the different queries we have in our application, which is really cool. I'll show you guys how to refetch data with this later on, but it's really important that you put a unique ID over here. In our case, we're gonna fetch data from a cat, so I'm just gonna put cat as the unique ID, and especially because we're not fetching anything else, but I would specify this and maybe keep track of all the different IDs that you have. Maybe keep them in an object or something like that, and just import it and use it in your application. Then over here, the second argument is a function that will actually fetch the data. So this is something a lot of people get confused with. React Query is not a replacement to fetch or Axios. Actually, you have to fetch the data and give it to React Query so that React Query later on gets the data and handles everything for you. So you'll still be having to fetch the data. We're still gonna import over here at the top Axios from the Axios library, right? We've learned Axios before. It's already installed into this code base, but if you don't, just install npm install Axios. We still have to use this because we still have to fetch the data. So over here, the next argument to it is a function that will do exactly that. This function should return what is known as the data from the Axios response. So technically, we could just say something like this. We could come over here, create the function, and say Axios dot get, just like this, and get the actual data from the API. Let's just get this thing over here and put it over here. This is the link to the API. And then saying .then, and just getting the response from the function and just returning back the data. So we have to say res.data over here and give back from this function. We have to return the data that the Axios API request gets, right? Now, if we just return this, right, because we are returning it makes the Axios request, then on this function, it returns the data. So when we say return this, we are getting this thing over here. When it does this, we can actually get this data directly from here, and this variable will be like everything that needs to be handled from React Query will be handled into this. So you don't have to create a state to represent the data anymore. This serves as the state that represents the data you get back from the API. So technically, I could just come over here and say this is the home page, and then I don't know, put a p tag and say data.fact. Now the reason why we're saying data.fact is because if you recall, it's already showing, but you can see, you remember that the object we get back from the API includes a fact property that has the actual fact, right? So as you can see now, every time we go to the home page, it actually shows the API request. But one thing is, if I refresh this page over here, you'll see it will break. And the reason why it will break is for the same reason I've already explained. Fact doesn't exist, like data is null until the query is done. So there's a couple ways we can actually handle this. We can, for example, put a question mark over here, and what this will do is, until data becomes not null, it won't access the fact. So it won't try to access fact from a null object, because this question mark is basically just saying only access this if this is not null. And this will fix it, because that's what it was causing the error, right? Now we'll refresh the data and it will load for a little bit, as you can see, and then show the actual data. For a split second, it's showing just the text, this is a home page, because it is a home page for a few seconds, right? Until the data comes back. Now this is one of the good things with React Query. It's just one of the amazing features it has. You can actually get a boolean from this useQuery hook called isLoading. So it already handles this for you. This isLoading is a boolean that if it is true while the data is loading. So it is true for that specific amount of time where you fetch the data, but the data hasn't been returned yet. So technically, you can just come over here and say, if isLoading is true, then I want to return some sort of text saying loading, like 3 dots, something like this. So instead of returning this, while the data is loading, it will show this whole thing over here. And you'll see that this is exactly what happens. It shows loading for a split second, and then shows the actual thing, right? On a real website, I would put a loading like spinner. You've seen it in many different websites, but this is how they actually know if the data is loading or not, because of this boolean. And this is really cool. You can actually get also like the error, and so many other things. Like you can get like the time in which an error was updated, is loading error, is refetch error, is error. Like, there's so much stuff, right? That is really cool. If I get this is error over here, I can just say if is error, then return a text saying sorry, there was an error. But the thing is, obviously we can't, like, there's not going to be an error, so you guys won't be able to see this, but we can actually fake an error by maybe writing the API endpoint wrong, and you'll see that it will say the same. It will say loading until it fails, and then it's going to realize that there was an error, right? So it's just trying to fetch the data, but obviously there's no data to be fetched. I can, like, the same thing happens here. If I delete everything, you'll see that it still keeps loading. But yeah, that's basically it for the most basic features of this library. Now there's another thing. There's the refetch property. It's a function that you can get from here, which is really cool. Now imagine a situation where you have your website and you have an API, and this API, for example, has a list of users, right? And you're just displaying that list of users. And you create a new user, so now the data in the backend is outdated from the data in the front end, because the front end won't know that the backend has changed data. But you can kind of force to make another request by using this refetch thing over here. This is a function that whenever you call it, it will request the data again. So if I create a button over here, and I know this example isn't that good because every time we request the data, it will be a different fact about a cat, right? But there's a lot of situations where you need to update the data in the front end, and that's how you would do something like this. So I'm just gonna say update data and create a button and give an onClick over here. And all I want to do in this onClick is I just want to call the refetch function. I can even just put refetch over here. And now if I come over here and I click on this button, it will refetch the data. As you can see, it's updating as we go. And remember, there's no states in this application, so we don't have to update the state. Everything is handled directly from this data object over here. What is other stuff that you guys might be interested in? Well, I think people complain a lot that you have to call this data when, imagine you're fetching two queries from the same component. Would you have two variables called data? Probably not, right? So this is more of a JavaScript thing, but you can change the name of this to a variable you want. So if I wanted to call this cat effect, I can just say, or cat data, I can just say something like this, cat data. And I'm basically replacing the name of this data object or this data property for cat data. So instead of saying data over here, I'll just say cat data, and it would still work. As you can see, it's still working perfectly. It's just a small thing that I thought would be cool to see. Now, there's a cool thing that I feel like is also really interesting, and it's the only thing I'm going to show you guys from configuration for React Query, because I just want to explain to you guys how powerful this is by showing you this small thing that you probably don't even think about, but it's important to recognize when you're building a real project. For example, look what happens when I move to another page. I'm going to go to this tab over here, and I'm going to come back, and you see it will request the data again. And that's crazy, right? But is it really crazy? Because if you have an application that has a lot of data constantly updating, this could be a cool way for you to constantly have your data being updated, even when you switch tabs, right? Usually you switch tabs whenever you stop using the website. So maybe you'll spend like 10 minutes on this CatFact website, and when you come back, you want to have the most updated data. So React Query does this by default, where if you switch tabs or you're not focused on this window, it will just refetch the data. You can actually specify if you want that or not by coming to your app.js over here and going back to the query client that we created. I mentioned in the beginning that you can put configurations here, and I wasn't going to show it, but I'll just show you real quick because I think it's cool to show it to you guys. So you can put an object over here, and you can access an object called default options. And this over here allows you to put some interesting configurations. You can specify which kind of configurations you want to add. So you can add a query configuration and a mutation configuration. Now, I know I didn't talk about mutations, but it's a really important topic and concept in front-end development and back-end development as a whole. Just always think about it as a query, as being getting a data, like making a request for a data. So it's what we've been doing so far. We did a GET request to get the data from an API. And a mutation would be any kind of API request where you change the data, or you create a data, you update a data, or you delete. The way I like to teach is saying that the query is just the read from CRUD, and mutation is the CUD from CRUD, right? The create, update, and delete, while the query is just the read, right? So in this case, we want to specify, we want to change the query. And what we want to specify about the queries is we want to say that whenever there is a Windows focus, we don't want to refetch it. So there's this thing called refetch on Windows focus. We can just set it to be false. And whenever we refetch it, it will now be, like whenever we switch for Windows, it will now be false. So I'm going to come over here. You'll see that we have, I'm going to update just so you guys see. I'm going to refresh. We have this thing over here. A cat has only the ability to move their jaw up and down, not side to side like a human cat. Cool, I didn't know that. But now if I switch tabs and come back, it's still the same thing, right? It doesn't update. While if I set that to true, like it was by default, it would obviously do that. Like I'll come over here, and oh, I need to refresh the page, but yeah, it will now switch whenever I move pages, see? So this is just one of the thousands of configurations you can actually put. Oh, this is actually a massive one, but yeah, of the 1,000 configurations you can put in React Query, and this is what we're going to be using throughout the rest of the series until we get to something that doesn't require fetching data, but you understand that this is what we're going to be using. And I hope I made it clear how amazing React Query is, because this is the whole reason why we're migrating from using a use effect, and why from now on we're going to have the strict mode enabled in our React application to enforce best practices in our apps. So this is basically it for this video. Remember, all of the code will be in the description. If you want to check it out, just go ahead. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like down below and comment what you want to see next. Subscribe, because I'm going to be posting twice a week. This course is going amazing. I know the views aren't that high, but I knew this was gonna happen. That's why at the end of the course, I'm gonna post the same course again inside of one single video, because there's people who like this kind of videos and which like this kind of courses where it's all separated, but there's also people who love just a single very long video. So I'm gonna do both, and I hope that works out. It does get demotivating when I see like less and less views every time I post a video, but trust me, I know a lot of you guys are commenting, please don't stop the course. I'm not gonna stop the course. If I didn't stop my YouTube channel when I was getting 50 views a video, I'm not gonna stop this course right now. So don't worry about it. I'm gonna finish this course because I knew this was gonna happen, and I'm motivated. I really like making these videos for you guys. So yeah, that's basically it. I really hope you guys enjoyed it, and I see you guys next